So when we're electrofishing for lamprey, we actually have to use different settings than we use for our traditional bony fish or salmonid settings. So the really big difference is lamprey are burrowed in the fine sediments, the larval lamprey are, and we need to encourage them out in order to catch them. So our settings are not intended to stun them or immobilize them like we use for our bony fish. We're trying to draw bony fish into our electrical current so we can net them, and we ideally are preventing them from swimming as fast as they normally would. Instead, with lamprey, we want to encourage them out of the sediment. So we use a tickle setting or an annoy setting that encourages them out so we can capture them. So that setting is different in that it is pulses of electricity that are spread out. So we have pulses that we use for our bony fish, but it basically interacts with the fish as a continuous pulse. And for lamprey, it's really slow. So it's 3 pulses per second with a pulse off. And that again is gonna, the fish is gonna feel it. It's not gonna like it. It's not gonna hurt them. They can still swim, but they're going to want to move away from it. So that allows them to move out of the sediment and start swimming in the water column where we can net them. There's a secondary setting that we can use called the stun setting, and this is really similar and can even be programmed the same as our traditional salmonid settings, where it is going to immobilize that fish. It's going to prevent it from swimming, and so you can stun the lamprey and net it. The one caveat with that is that lamprey don't have a swim bladder. So when you stun them and they stop swimming, they're going to sink. And so depending on if you've got a lot of large wood or leaf litter, it may be hard to scoop them, and it may be easier to just capture them as they're swimming away. Again, the tickle setting, that first initial setting, isn't going to prevent them from swimming, so they're going to be actively trying to get away, and so it's important that your netters are surrounding your electrofishing person on either side and capturing lamprey as they try to swim away. So the big difference is that pulse setting. And we set that up if you're using a Smith Root electrofisher. Smith Root has a really great walkthrough available on their website. If you just search Smith Root and lamprey, there's a PDF and there's also a video that helps you to program their backpack so that you can set up those settings ahead of time. I would recommend setting up ahead of time before you get out to the field because it actually takes a little while. You have to walk through several steps in order to program the 2 waveforms. And so do that ahead of time. I like to save my kind of traditional bony fish settings as program 1. You can save it, and then you can save lamprey as program 10 and just toggle back and forth between those. But it is important to do ahead of time, and Smith Root has a really great step-by-step process to go through that. And then when you get in the field, depending on how big your project site is, how many people you have available to help you with the salvage, you can basically do a bony fish salvage pass through and then have another team come through and collect lamprey using those lamprey settings. You just want to give 15 minutes or so for the different passes so that the fish have time to recover after having the initial pass through. You can also, with those electrofishing settings, tag team it. So you can be going with your bony fish team, and when you see really quality lamprey habitat, you can switch over to those lamprey settings and shock that area for lamprey. So kind of varies depending on the scale of your project and whether or not you've got multiple teams that are able to do fish salvage. In addition to the pulsed setting for that primary waveform, the tickle or annoy setting, we also use really low voltage. So typically I'm shocking at about 125 volts, sometimes 150. If you're in a really low conductivity stream, that tends to limit how far your electricity can travel, and so sometimes we'll up our electricity, our voltage use, but generally speaking, it's a very low voltage and it's lower than what we use for our bony fish. So the idea is it's not impacting those other fish, they can just swim away, but it is just trying to encourage those lamprey out of their burrows. So low voltage and pulsed setting are the classic components of the lamprey specific shocking settings and what we need to kind of use in addition to our traditional bony settings. For the stun setting, that can just be 125 volts as well, but it's just a different amount of pulses per second. And again, the Smith Root training or their interface online is really great for walking through, setting that up on your backpack electrofisher.
Knowledge check. True or false? The settings used to target lamprey are stronger than those used for salmonoids because the larval lamprey are in the soil and harder to shock. That is false, because lamprey electrofishing settings are lighter than those used for salmonoids. The current is only meant to irritate them and encourage them to enter the water column, not to stun them.
Our native lampreys require many different habitats to complete their life history. And so when we're conducting a salvage, it's really important to understand where you might find lamprey. So our larval lamprey are in the stream for upwards of 10, maybe even more years, filter feeding and growing. And so we have multiple age cohorts oftentimes at these salvage projects, and they're usually the life stage that you're going to come across the most. And so larval lamprey are really looking for fine sediments, nice soft accumulations of fine sediments where there's high organic material. They'll also be intermixed with aquatic vegetation or rushes and sedges that grow along channel margins. They like to queue into pockets of those sediments that they can burrow in, because again, they're going to be burrowed in those fine sediments. So a lot of times that is accumulations around large wood or sometimes some boulders. Anytime you have structure in a stream, that creates those pockets of sediment sorting. So a lot of times when you have some sort of structural element, you'll have those fine sediments and you'll see larval lamprey. As the larval lamprey grow and they get larger and start to transform into juvenile lampreys, which for our anadromous lampreys are the life stage that are going to go out to the ocean, they start to pick up on and be in interstitial spaces in between cobbles and gravels. So they're not always in fine sediments. So it's important to also sample in some coarser material. If the stream bed is really embedded and there's no interstitial spaces and it's just really hard packed, you're likely not going to have very many lamprey there because they're going to have a hard time kind of getting in there, and there's no safe space for them to be. So depending on kind of what the substrate is, you might want to be shocking larger areas. The other thing that those larger juveniles are going to utilize is they can be on the edge of the stream bank in some undercuts or anywhere that they're protected from predators and high flows. They're going to be going through this transformation process, which takes months, and they're just holding during that time, not feeding, and just transforming and getting ready to go out to the ocean. So they just are looking for a safe space. So a lot of times that's kind of on channel margins, or it can be out in the middle of the river if there's, big cobbles that they can tuck under. So really variable habitat. For the adults, a lot of times when we're working on salvage projects, we see them, these are culvert projects. We're pulling out a perched culvert and there's a lot of riprap and bigger cobbles or, foreign material that's been put around that culvert, and there's big spaces in there. A lot of times we'll see adult lamprey that are in those spaces. So they've reached the kind of endpoint, they can't pass that culvert, but they're still trying to figure it out. So they'll be tucked in those areas. So as you pull those bigger rocks away, a lot of times you'll see adult lamprey there. So really variable habitat that you might encounter lamprey, but again, those fine substrates are where we'll tend to see high concentrations of larval lamprey, and where we want to actually use those lamprey electrofishing settings to pull them out of the sediment. When it comes to strategies for salvage, it really varies depending on the scale of the project and what kind of conditions are present. But we do tend to see, for these salvage projects, it's helpful to have a crew that is working on lamprey and a crew that's working on bony fish, so you can be conducting these salvages in tandem. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have a crew that starts fishing for bony fish. They'll be using our traditional salmonid settings. They'll go through, and then 15 or so minutes later we'll have a second crew go through using the lamprey electrofishing settings. They might be targeting different habitats, but they're still going to be doing that salvage over the same area. A lot of times, we do multiple passes for our bony fish. We recommend just kind of doing multiple passes for lamprey as well. The real difference when it comes to lamprey and our ability to electrofish for them is even after we draw down our water, we've conducted our bony fish salvage, we've removed every fish that we can see, lamprey can still be in the fine sediments or even intermixed in those cobbly areas. And so we can use our same electrofishing settings, which are that pulse electrofishing setting, that's the tickle or annoy. We can use that setting on the dewatered environments that are still wet and still have lamprey in them. And we call that dry electrofishing. So you're going to be putting your probes directly on those sediments and encouraging those lamprey out. Lamprey want to stay in that wetted habitat. It's nice and safe. We usually see about 50% of lamprey come out when the water is removed, and another 50% of them think it might be worth it to stay there. So if we're doing a salvage project where we are going in and we're going to be excavating an entire area, we really want to try to get those lamprey out, and that's where we can use those dry electrofishing techniques, place our probes right on the ground and pull them out from those sediments. The other kind of difference when it comes to lamprey electrofishing compared to our bony fish is it's a little bit of a slower process. When we're fishing for our bony fish, we're walking up the stream, we're continually shocking, we're trying to pull them out from undercuts, and it's more of a kind of moving process. When we're shocking for lamprey, we actually are setting our probes right on the substrate, and you stand there for a little while. We can shock for 15, 30 seconds within kind of a meter area. You generally want your probes to be about a meter, half meter apart. And again, we want them to come out. So we want to hang out for a little bit and annoy them so that they are willing to leave that safety of their burrow and move out of the way. So it's definitely a slower process. You're going to be standing in a single spot. And what we tend to see is that for some sites, the second I turn on my electrofishing, I start shocking, lamprey will start coming out. But in other cases, they might burrow deeper. Sometimes larger larvae are burrowed deeper. And so hanging out for a little bit can encourage more of them to come out. So again, it's a little bit slower of a process. You're not moving as fast through the stream bed. And so you just want to make sure you have extra time and extra people to make that process effective and really get those lamprey out of the fine sediments. Again, as that water draws down and you start to get exposed substrates, keeping a team that also is walking through and looking for lamprey that are in those interstitial spaces and those cobbles that are trying to move out with that water can be an effective salvage method as well. And also by kind of looking for lamprey after the water's been removed from a site, you can take advantage of that time to also look for our native mussels, because oftentimes those are kind of hunkering down in the same way, trying to wait it out and see if there's better conditions coming. And once that water's removed for a little bit, they'll come to the surface. So you can then conduct your freshwater mussel salvage kind of in tandem with your lamprey salvage. One of the ways that you can tell that your electrofishing settings are working, again, we're using those low voltages, usually about 125 to 150, but sometimes you're going to be in an area where you're not going to see lamprey and you're like, is this working? What you'll see is the invertebrate community will still be responding. So those other creatures that are along the benthic habitats there, the macroinvertebrates, worms, you'll see them moving around. They're feeling the electricity as well. And so if you don't have lamprey present, but you are seeing those other species moving and feeling the electricity, you know it's working, you know you have enough voltage, and you can just move on to a new site where there's potentially lamprey.
Knowledge check. True or false? Larval lamprey prefer habitats with fine sediments, especially with complexity features like large woody debris, but they can also be found in gravels. True.
An important component to have on your salvage site that's going to be helpful for capturing lamprey are fine mesh nets. So a lot of times the nets that we will just have for our everyday bony fish collection are going to have too wide of mesh, and the lamprey will slip right through. The smaller lamprey are around 10 millimeters, so they kind of look like a pine needle. They're very small, and so a lot of the nets that we'll just have on site, they're just going to slip right through. We're not going to be able to salvage them. So what we recommend is these really fancy aquarium nets on a dowel. This is a very cheap option for salvage. They do break down, they're not the most robust thing, but they are going to be really helpful when you're on site. You can also order fine mesh nets from any place that you're getting your regular nets that you're using for salvage. But these are really helpful in that you can get kind of all of your larval size classes and they're not going to slip through. There's another example here of a mesh size that is a little bit bigger. These are very available, but this is actually going to be big enough that smaller larvae can slip right through here. So good option. It's better than nothing, but again, these kind of just aquarium nets are what we tend to use quite often on salvage sites. And they will break down, you will have to replace them, but they are, really helpful, and would recommend using these for lamprey salvage. So when you're conducting a salvage, it can be really helpful to identify a few of the lamprey. Salvage are often kind of stressful and fast-paced, so you don't have to do all of them, but it can be helpful to understand if you've got an anadromous lamprey present or potentially mostly resident lamprey. And the way that we identify lamprey is a little bit tricky, so you have to really look at them. At the larval stage, we're cueing in on their caudal fin or their tail fin, and the coloration of the caudal ridge, and then the fin itself tells us whether or not it is Pacific lamprey, which is in the genus Entosphenus, or our Western River and Western Brook lamprey, which are in the genus Lampetra. So we look at that coloration for larval lamprey. At the juvenile and adult stage, we actually use the teeth, the dentition pattern, to identify the different species. And so at that stage, if you've got larvae or if you've got juveniles and adults present, you can actually use a mason jar, a fish viewer, anything that's got a clear glass or plexiglass, and they will suction on that, and you can actually look at the pattern of the teeth, the number of teeth, and identify the species. So if you have time and you have the interest in seeing what species are present at your location, you can look at the tail for the larval lamprey and the teeth for the adults and juvenile life stage. You can also use eDNA to look at what species are present at your location. This can be particularly useful if you are removing a barrier that's prevented fish from getting there, and you want to see if lamprey are getting above your fixed barrier. And so you can look at both those species again, Entosphenus, our Pacific lamprey, and our grouping of Lampetra in a different genus using eDNA.
Knowledge check. True or false? Juvenile and adult lamprey have an oral disc that can be used to identify them to species. At these stages, the tail is not a useful identification feature. True.
This is an example of a larval Lampetra, so either a Western River or Western Brook lamprey. They are the same species but have different life history strategies. So you can think of them similar to a steelhead and a rainbow trout, where they're both Oncorhynchus micus, but one of them goes to the ocean and the other stays resident. We can tell that this is a Lampetra because the coloration of the caudal fin or the tail fin. So you can see that there is a dark uniform ridge for the caudal ridge. That's kind of the structure of the tail. And then the caudal fin itself has some light it is almost opaque. It's not quite clear, but it doesn't have pigment. It doesn't have coloration in the caudal fin. Those are the key characteristics that we use to distinguish Lampetra compared to our Pacific lamprey, which when we are looking at that species, this is an example of our Pacific lamprey. It has for the caudal ridge, the coloration fades, so it's darker towards the center of the body, and then it fades, and at the very tip is quite light, sometimes almost translucent. And then the caudal fin itself has pigmentation. So it's often darkest next to the caudal ridge and then fades out towards the edge of the caudal fin. But we see quite a lot of pigmentation in these fish. It's really hard to identify larval lamprey that are smaller than around 70 millimeters. So the larger they get, the more distinguished those characteristics are. But it's the tail that really can tell us which species is present at our restoration sites.
Knowledge check. True or false? This is a photo of a caudal fin and caudal ridge of a larval Lampetra lamprey. You can tell by how the pigment along the caudal ridge is a uniform dark color, and there is little to no pigment on the caudal fin. True.